dive in the deep end. It's time to defend your movie.
Hello, friends, and welcome to this week's episode of Defending Your Movie. I am your host, Jeremy Meyer. So we are just a few days away from Christmas at this point, this past weekend. The new Spider-Man film just came out, which we put out a Spider-Man episode a couple weeks ago. Be sure to go check that one out. It was a really fun one. But today we're looking at another Marvel film. One of the, I feel like if you look at anyone's ranking of MCU movies, this one is always towards the bottom. And that was kind of just never the way I felt about it. I always thought it was better than I got credit for. And today is also fun because it's the first time I've had two guests on the episode, two returning guests. So today I'm sitting down with Seth Decker and Aerin Moriarty, people who have been on the show many times and will probably be on the show many times to come. But yeah, we are talking about Thor: The Dark World, the first sequel to the Thor movies before Taika Waititi got his hands on it and turned it into something really special. But I always thought Dark World was at least better than the first movie and better than it gets a lot of credit for. I think there's a lot to enjoy about this film. And this was actually recorded right after the Loki television show ended on Disney+. So there's actually a lot of interesting conversation about this movie in retrospect after, now where we've seen Thor end up after Avengers Endgame and where Loki has ended up after his TV series and, things to come with Thor: Love and Thunder. So it was a really fun, interesting conversation. And honestly, I think one of my favorite podcasts I've done for this show so far. So I really want to get us into this one. So let's get started. Before we go, you can always follow us on social media at Defending Movie on Twitter and Instagram. We also have our Patreon at patreon.com/defendingmovie. Then we have our merch store at belowthecollar.com/defendingyourmovie. We have some great MCU-inspired shirts. If you want to pick one of those up, you always can. And as always, we are sponsored by the Cryptic Closet. Go to crypticcloset.com and use promo code DEFEND to get 21% off your order. Some really great horror-themed merchandise. And I was talking to him recently and possibly some really cool stuff in their future. So keep your ears open for that on this show. I will definitely address it because it might actually benefit this show as well. So without further ado, let's get into my favorite episode of the show so far, Thor: The Dark World. All right, so I'm glad both of you guys could join me. This is my first ever double guest podcast.
We're glad to be here.
Would that mean that you have to leave with our opinion as well? Just the majority wins? Because that sounds like just an easy slam dunk for Aerin and I.
Yeah.
I think luckily we all kind of share an opinion of this movie.
Yeah.
Which I should have looked this up beforehand of what is like the audience score for this movie, because I feel like everybody, whenever a new Marvel movie comes out, they want to, hey, here's my new ranking of Marvel movies. And I always feel like this one is towards the bottom for most people. It's
always at the very bottom for nearly everyone. And I don't necessarily understand it.
Yeah, same as the
audience score is 75% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's checked.
Yeah,
that's
and
harsh.
critics is 66, which is no.
Yeah.
I understand, when I first saw it, and I this was one of the ones I didn't rush out to see in theater, just because the first Thor movie, honestly, I like this one better than the first one. The first one is usually lower on my list, and I always preface this by, hey, I love every Marvel movie, so it kind of doesn't matter. But Thor: The Dark World, I saw it a little after it had come out, and my expectations were kind of low. I was like, yeah, the first one was fine, but it kind of just felt like getting to Avengers.
Yeah.
But I just always had a lot of fun with this movie.
This movie is very fun.
Yeah, I think it brings the fun more so than most of the movies of this era, because this was around Winter Soldier and Iron Man 3, although Iron Man 3 is pretty fun too.
Yeah. So, I have a list of reasons why I think this film gets a bad rap or why it may not resonate with everyone, and I kind of wanted to go over a couple of them first. First off, it doesn't necessarily stand out well alone. Like, it definitely benefits from having backstory with the characters more than I think a lot of the other Marvel franchise films can.
I have a thought on that.
Yeah.
And my thought is I do feel this movie works best as world building.
Yeah.
That this does a lot, especially in retrospect with post Endgame and post Loki.
Yeah.
That this movie has done a lot of building for these characters and a little bit for the universe as a whole.
And that's the second point. This is, while there are a lot of big actions and things that are have huge consequences happening in the movies, it really first and foremost is about characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it does that stuff really well.
It does absurdly
when I was watching it, I was thinking that I don't know if there is a better relationship that has been explored in the MCU of Thor and Loki.
No, not really.
Yeah,
Gamora and Nebula, kind of, but they haven't had as much time.
Well, yeah. And that's likely going to be a big chunk of their third movie too, which is exciting. I think the because as Aerin has coined, the MCU's is pretty sexless. I think their familial relationships kind of take default front and center. Iron Man and his dad, or Thor and his brother, or Gamora and her sister. That's the relationships that get pushed kind of front and center for that reason.
Is Captain America in what's her name, Carter? Or is that the most focus they've ever put on a romantic relationship? And even that they don't show much because a lot of it is them not even together anymore.
It's really Iron Man and Peggy, but really only until Gwyneth decided she wasn't going to do the role anymore.
Yeah, Star-Lord and Gamora, I think, are the other. They're my favorite MCU couple. Just because they're fucked up, and I appreciate that about characters. Okay, Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter are too perfect. And I don't mean that in a bad way. They're too perfect for me to put myself into that position. But then you have Star-Lord and Gamora, where they know how to fight each other, and they also know how to fight together. And yeah, I think I prefer their relationship of things in the MCU.
Yeah, there's actually a line in this movie that stood out to me when Natalie Portman is out to lunch with Chris O'Dowd in the beginning, and he makes a comment of his ex-girlfriend was sleeping with a bunch of other dudes, and I was like, oh, is that the first reference to sex in this MCU?
Iron Man got away with a couple implied sex scenes. Not a lot.
Yeah, I guess he has the journalist in the first Iron Man movie. I guess that is a little more overt than that.
Yeah,
but even still, it did jump out to me. It's not something you hear a lot in these movies.
Yeah, exactly. Aerin, what was some other stuff on your list of reasons? I'm very curious at how many we both came up with that are different from each other.
Okay. So my next one is kind of a big one, and that is, this is kind of Lord of the Rings meets Star Wars, but also there's the real world, and that's a hard sell. That in and of itself is a hard sell. But
I totally understand what you're
Natalie
saying,
Portman in a film that intrinsically feels like Lord of the Rings meets Star Wars puts it in Star Wars prequel territory.
Yeah.
And there's definitely parallels that can be made. And if you hate the prequels, you're not going to be able to ignore those parallels, and you're probably going to hate them for it.
Yeah, the whole
Hold on
attack
1 second.
on...
I think I laid on my thing, and I can't hear anyone but myself. Hold on.
Huh? You can't hear us?
Oh, I think they popped their headphones out of the thing.
Oh, okay.
I guess we can keep screaming until Aerin hears us.
I can hear you again. Hold on 1 second, though.
Okay.
I'm going to also cover Shibby up since I'm already taking a moment, because she's been fussing, and I'm over it.
All right. Well, while you're doing that, we're going to make a
You were getting
timestamp here.
chance to be quiet, but now I'm going to cover you over, and you're going to have to go to night-nights, okay? I'm sorry. Night-night.
I was making a note as well, just in case you weren't.
Yeah, no,
that's
I got
my default whenever I sit down to podcast is I pull out my notepad and I take timestamps down and That's just
Yeah, I should be doing that more.
Okay, so sorry about that. Did you guys hear everything that I had to say?
Yeah.
So the prequels, if that's a bad taste, is gonna
Especially with the Natalie Portman parallels. Yeah.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
That was the last thing you had said.
Yeah, no, like you saying that out loud, I'm like, oh, there is kind of like a Star Wars meets Lord of the Rings aspect. Like, and I like all of that stuff about these movies. Like, what I like about this one in particular compared to the first one is how much time we actually get to spend with Asgard this time around. And like we're actually put in a fantastical world, and like we see fantastical creatures, and like I love the technology meets like the old fashioned like battle stuff.
Yes, that 100%
Like
works.
I think all
for
that
me.
stuff works really well here.
Yeah. I love that. That is all stuff that works very well for me. So it doesn't detract from the film, but I can definitely see it not being for everyone, especially because the first one is more focused in like, Midgard and stuff like that. And the third one really doesn't have as many of the sci-fi aspects. This one feels it fairly stands alone in terms of feeling in regards to those 3 Thor movies.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It has a lot of people other than Thor that have really great moments.
Yeah.
Most of those moments are had by female characters.
Yeah.
Like, Jamie Alexander, Seth, she's always a treat. She has some badass fight moments. Frigga, she's a stone cold badass. Darcy, she's hilarious. Jane, she does have some moments where Natalie Portman can be hit or miss for me, and I honestly, this is not one of my favorite Natalie Portman roles.
Sure.
I like her better in other things. It feels like there's a certain degree of, I don't want to say phoning it in. It doesn't feel like she is as the other actors.
I did always have this feeling that maybe she was a little too, I don't want to use the word good because that's a little derogative, but like she definitely didn't need to be in these movies, and like phoning it in is maybe the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Like I am actually a big Natalie Portman fan. Like I love a lot of her stuff. Like I was like Garden State and Black Swan and all that stuff. Always been a fan of her, and she always just kind of stood out in these movies of like, just something about it just doesn't fit.
Yeah.
But I hope with Taika Waititi we see, and like giving her a bigger role, because in the first one there's definitely a lot of she's impressed by the muscles, and some of that I think carries over into this one as well. But I think she's better written in this one.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that I think like one of the big criticisms that I have is like there does not feel to be consistent chemistry between the two of them.
Yeah.
Like there's the scene with Natalie with Jane and Thor, and they're like on Asgard, and they're close together, and like Chris Hemsworth is acting his ass off. His eyes are twinkling. He's like got tears in the corner of his eyes a little bit, and he's like all focused on her and everything like that. And she just doesn't have an expression. Like literally, I could not tell you what her character is feeling in that moment. She just doesn't seem to be anywhere near as there as Thor is.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's because there was some behind the scenes stuff that angered her with this movie, because originally, I don't know if anyone remembers, but Patty Jenkins was supposed to direct this movie.
I do remember that.
And she had signed, she was like personally brought in by Natalie Portman. And then they were like, oh, yeah, totally. We're totally going to make this movie with Patty Jenkins. And then something happened. They cite creative differences, and she's out. And, it was very public that Natalie Portman was unhappy about that. And I wonder if maybe she brought that to her performance a little bit.
Yeah, that I can definitely sense that, too.
Yeah, because I think we were all surprised when she was announced for Love and Thunder.
Yeah.
Like
she didn't really seem to be that interested in the future of the franchise. The only thing that I can think of is that, time has passed, her career has changed in certain ways, and I definitely think that they are more willing to do, like, a Jane Foster Thor, and especially with, like, the what-if things.
Yeah.
I think perhaps having the ability to be Jane Foster Thor at any ability level, like whether it be on What If, whether it be in movies or on another series, I think that would be a powerful motivator for her.
Sure.
Yeah, and getting to work with Taika Waititi, like he's
Right.
going to treat
Right.
it well.
Yeah.
So
There's another aspect to it that I'm wondering. So Natalie Portman is like very intelligent as a person.
Yeah.
Just what she's accomplished in her life is just evidence of how smart she is. And I think she may have been able to see the canary in the coal mine of the MCU up to this point relegates any non-superhero characters to exposition and jokes. Maybe, if
Yeah.
you're lucky, you get to do both. So I think
which she does both in this
right,
movie.
exactly. And I think she recognized that if she weren't being brought in as a full stop hero, that she was always going to be kind of that second fiddle character that and like pouring acting experience into explaining Asgardian technology or cracking a joke. That's great for, like, not quite as well established actors that are kind of getting their chops in the world. Totally, I can see that. But Natalie Portman's like was very well established leading into the MCU, and I think
had she
Can I make a
already
hot
won
take?
her Oscar?
oh, go for
Can I
it.
make a hot take? I think that any other character, any other female played character would have been more compelling for Natalie Portman than Jane Foster has a very typical role. Oh wow, the girl of the hero has something happen and we need to save the girl and then save the world. Like that's it's a trope. It's not even handled like that great in this film. I give it, like her character is the weak point of this film, period, end stop. But like Frigga, she's like this wise, beautiful all-mother, and she kicks ass.
Yeah.
And she
I totally
got
forgot about her little
magic.
action scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like watching it this time, I was like, oh yeah, she's awesome.
Sif starts out kicking ass, and she also gets to have the like Eponine-esque, if you're a Les Mis fan, that means something to you. If not, I'm sorry. She has this Eponine-esque, scenario where she's in love with Thor, but then Thor's like, oh, this little waif over here, that's the one for me. And she's like, oh, okay. Well, I mean, that's fine, I guess. But what does this mean for me? But rather than just be like that person, like you have that bitter, jaded lover, but she's more than that. Which, by the way, I have to bring this back. So after the Loki, like if you've seen Loki, there's a scene between Loki and Sif, and as a result of that, it came out that that scene canonically is meant to follow a sexual scene between Loki and Sif. Basically, they were dating or lovers.
Oh, that's out there somewhere?
Yeah, Natalie Holt, the who did the music, confirms that was. If it wasn't actually like written out as a scene, the scene is meant to infer that the two of them had a sexual relationship. Loki had spent the night in her bed and cut her hair off. And a lot of fans are theorizing that basically Sif was the first woman to see like any type of like vulnerability from Loki out in Loki, and because he's like, well, nope, people can't see me vulnerable, so I'm gonna cut off her hair, and like, that's the fan canon surrounding it. But yeah, Natalie Holt, that's what she said. Rewatching this film, fully knowing that prior to this point, Sif and Loki banged, it puts all of their interactions, even at the very towards the middle when Loki is doing his little illusion walk with Thor, which is a brilliant scene between the two brothers.
Oh, yeah.
And Loki transforms Thor into Sif, and Loki says basically, dying isn't going to hurt any less like from her, and I'm like, oh, it might actually hurt more.
Right.
So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask, because you guys have deep dived on Loki, which, check that out on YouTube. Was there anything in this movie that like really was like, aside from what you were just mentioning, or like did anything in this movie kind of hit you differently after the experiencing Loki?
That definitely did. There a lot of the whole situation with Odin's relationship with him, you feel a lot worse for Loki, I think. Like, just hearing the way that Odin talks to and about Loki versus the way he talks to and about Thor.
Yeah.
I pay attention
which
to that
Odin,
more.
worst father of the MCU.
Yep.
But
his line to Loki when they first arrive with Loki in handcuffs, where he says, your birthright was to die alone on a rock
Yeah.
in the cold.
Yeah.
Oh,
That was the thing I was just.
Do you
about
know
to
which
bring
one
up.
hit
It's
different
so,
for
It
me?
hits so hard.
Satisfaction
Which
is
one?
not in my nature.
ooh,
Yeah, that one too.
Is
Yeah,
Loki
that
not
that as well.
satisfied right now?
right.
But Loki.
Yeah.
It just makes me. It made me feel. I think I'm actually going to do like a video essay that is comparing like Loki's narrative arcs in this and in the TV series because
Yeah.
it's fascinating how and this being the 3 Thor movies and like the other films.
Yeah, and Loki has always been one of my favorite in the MCU. Like going back to, for me, it probably started in Avengers, because like in the first Thor, I was like, yeah, I really liked him, but by Avengers, I was like, oh no, he's like really good, and this kind of solidified because I know they did reshoots to add in more Loki. Like I think that walk out of the prison was a reshoot scene, and where they added in the Steve Rogers moment and all that stuff. Yeah, like adding more of him into this movie, I think did so much more for it.
Loki has
Oh no, go ahead.
Loki has the biggest little brother energy ever in this. I don't even have siblings, and I know like that scene when they're like when Thor is flying and Loki is just backseat driving.
Yeah.
It's just little brother energy, and
Yeah.
they feel very convincing as siblings.
Oh, like their chemistry is the most believable out of anybody.
Yeah.
Like I totally believe. Like going back to that scene in Infinity War, like right before Loki dies, and just the way they talk to each other, you're like, oh, these people feel like they are
Yeah.
brothers.
Yeah.
My hot take for this episode, this is my favorite Loki performance in the MCU until we got the Loki series.
Really?
Yeah. He's very good in this.
I love his braggadocious Avengers turn. I like that. That's that's excellent. You can tell his stage acting is coming out strong in that. He's a lot of fun in the original Thor, but he's not quite there. This movie gives him he's a straight up heel at the beginning. Then he gets to become an emo boy stuck in prison, only to escape and actually have camaraderie with his brother and the people that he's been jealous of his whole life, to then get that final knife twist turn at the end. You get to see every version of Loki in this movie.
Yeah, that's true. One moment I really like when they're bringing him before Odin, and he's like, I went down to rule as a benevolent god or whatever. And then, like, later after you find out that was it Frigga?
Frigga,
the mom's name?
Frigga.
That she had passed or whatever. Like seeing his illusion in the jail, so nobody sees how like truly devastated he actually is. And then all the way up to his quote unquote death scene, where it's like, I'll tell father what you did, and he's like, I didn't do it for him. Like, just all really great moments.
He sells
it, showing exactly who he is.
He really sells
it. I think one of the best parts about this movie and why it works out so well is because everything in Loki's life up to this point has been about trying to be up to Thor's level, and for the first time in Loki's entire life, Thor comes to him and says, I need to stoop to your level, and I need you to help me do it. And he is pants-shittingly excited about the whole affair.
Is that the best line in the movie? You must be truly desperate.
Yeah,
I love that. That might be my favorite line in the whole film.
I also like, you lied to me. I'm impressed.
Yes.
Yeah. That is one of the best Loki moments.
You see, and this is a fairly, like, quote unquote, young in his MCU career, Tom Hiddleston.
Yeah.
And you see in that scene where he's in jail with Frigga, he goes from just being like angry to being sad to being like just like closed off like super quick. Like it's just like in a line and a half of dialogue, he just completely captivatingly goes through all of those 3 emotions.
Yeah.
And you are along for the ride.
And I love Frigga calling him out on his bullshit, where she's talking about Odin, and he's like, that's not my father. And she's like, oh, so does that not make me your mother? And he's just speechless. Because, like, he does love her, and that's always been the one consistent with him.
That leads me into one of my reasons why I think this is the one of the underrated gems in the MCU. This movie is straight up Shakespeare.
Yep.
Like, it's all about...
More so than what the first one was.
Oh,
attempting.
yeah. And the first one, like, Kenneth Branagh really came for it. I feel like he's maybe a little underappreciated as a director just because he is so huge in his acting roles, but he can do both really well. However, I think this movie, maybe because it was like a TV director coming in to, kind of help it along or something like that, but all the actors feel like they got some kind of chance to run with their role a little bit.
Yeah.
And
even small actors like Fandral had that like nothing personal boys punch to the face.
Yeah.
And that very like Shakespearean stage play kind of feel.
Exactly.
Like this movie gave me with the Thor like franchise what I wanted from the first one, which was I love seeing more of like his comrades and stuff, and like they're all so good and they all get so little screen time in both of these movies, but in this one you actually get to see them doing more.
And they get to have that like Guy Ritchie Ocean's 11 sit down meeting of, well, how would we defy Odin if we were to do it, and then it's showing you as it's happening. I love those kinds of sequences. I think there's a specific name for them. I don't know what it is, but those sequences where they're explaining the plan as you're watching the plan happening. Love that kind of stuff. That just adds to the adventure of the whole thing.
And I love when they all stop and threaten Loki. It was like, hey, if you betray him, and he's like, well, apparently there's going to be a line. Like, that stuff's all so much fun. And I always forget Zachary Levi is in this, and Ray Stevenson is in this, just because like they're so hidden in their performances and their like makeup and wigs and stuff.
I was thinking of another great line of dialogue. A true king admits his faults.
Yep.
Because Thor, Odin, that's not a sentence that describes them.
No.
Not
I will
one
say,
iota.
Horrible,
especially Odin.
as horrible as a father Odin is, I do really enjoy Anthony Hopkins in all these. Yeah. And like him, I think this is the one where he is the most an asshole, to the point where he's like dismissing Jane right away. He's like, yeah, I know who you are and I don't really care.
He doesn't even care. Like, I understand why Loki kills him, because Loki disguised as someone else is like, yup, Loki's dead. And he's like, fucking sucks to be him, I guess. I mean, like, he just doesn't seem to give one single solitary fuck.
I
like, he's always... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I've always found that interesting. As you watch these movies, Odin becomes a villain, especially when you get into Ragnarok, and it's like the subtext of his villainy becomes text, and it's like, no, he was just a marauding conqueror, just like the fucking Dark Elves. He was just the next generation. What are you gonna do?
He just had a better PR manager. Like, realistically, that is all Odin's got. Odin has Frigga as his PR manager. Like, that is literally straight up, full stop, the only thing he has going for him that the Dark Elves don't. And Frigga basically points it out.
Hela was not wrong.
Like, she points
Hela
it
was
out.
not wrong about anything she said about him.
No, not enough.
Well, and that's
I really need to watch that again after watching this today.
It's a good... all three of these are so tonally different, and yet... are displaying.
They all work.
Yeah, they really display each like facet of what you can do. I think this is the most Jack Kirby of all of them, just because you spend so much time on Asgard. The sequence of Asgard getting attacked is, like Aerin was saying, straight up that's the Star Wars prequels. Like, that is just almost copy paste some of the ship designs
down to Natalie Portman being there.
Yeah. I do love the imploding grenades, though. Those are dope.
Awesome. So many... I think there's... The core of my thesis as to why I think this movie works better than people think it did is because there's no overt set piece. Like, every MCU movie has, like, one set piece in it that's what you run to when you think about the movie. Dark World does not have a... like single set piece, really,
or even a single aesthetic.
You kind of jump around. It's an adventure story, and adventure stories shouldn't
Exactly.
it should all kind of pace similarly. You have the kind of Goonies opening with Jane and Darcy finding out about the convergence, and then we go to Asgard for a huge chunk of the movie until we get into the finale. And I think because of its lack of set pieces, because of its Shakespearean nature, where every scene is building off of the last thing that we heard from the last characters, it's meant to like give it that forward momentum. It kind of just turns into an overall really good movie, but nothing stand out. And I think that's why people put it down there with Iron Man 2 and Incredible Hulk and movies that are objectively, I think, not as well written, not as well directed. The lighting in this movie, holy fucking shit. This movie is so good looking.
I really love, and I think a lot of that plays into the Asgardian aesthetic. But yeah, the look of this movie, it's really nice to look at. And even just, it's actually the image I use for the episode art is just when they're on the Dark World, just the look of Thor and Loki next to each other against this like black sky. Just even just an image as simple as that just looks really nice.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it has to do with like even just their costumes and stuff.
Oh,
like
the costumes are great.
The way they are kind of fantasy looking characters.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's fascinating to me, and what's really good about the 3 Thor films, is they really go to show how you can take a character, Thor, who might seem like a character who's either going to get locked in stories on Asgard or stories on Earth. And really, like, because I could see him be a character where everything either feels like, a character from the past that's stuck. What is the name of the trope when you have a character that's out of place?
Oh, fish out of water.
Fish out of water.
Yeah.
So, like, it's either going to be a fish out of water story with him on Earth, or it's going to be like kind of medieval, not like medieval, but like historical fantasy-esque Asgard stories. And the 3 films really go to show how you can just really have completely different genres, completely different feels, completely different aesthetics with the same characters. It still works. They're still in the same universe, and it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this movie even kind of does that within itself.
Yeah.
Like, while all 3 movies are very different. Like, just look at the posters for all 3 movies, and it's just insane. I mean, especially with Thor Ragnarok. But, like, yeah, like, how they're on Earth for a chunk, and then on Asgard for a while, or, like, some weird space stuff. Like, even in this movie, they're kind of hopping a little all over the place, but it's all fluid and works together.
They took risks, and those risks paid off. Like, a lot of directors don't want to take those sort of risks. They fit a film into a box, and that's what they go with.
Yeah.
And I do think that there is always going to be an inherent segment of your market that is only looking for a film that conforms to the genre that they're expecting. There are just people that don't want to have their expectations subverted in the way that this film sort of... Like, I don't think people really expected a Thor film to be Star Wars.
Yeah.
I think that was just kind of an idea that people went with because Natalie Portman wasn't. I mean, I don't remember at the time, but like, I don't remember after Thor 1 people expecting Thor 2 to feel like Star Wars the way this does.
Yeah, for sure. I think that Star Wars feel though is not like I personally I love it. I'm also a big defender of large chunks of the prequels. I get it. There's some cringe in there. I will never deny the cringe in the prequels, but I can defend.
I just realized the prequels are probably going to have to show up on this podcast at some point.
I will whole ass jump in and defend Attack of the Clones, even though that is the cringiest Star Wars.
Yeah,
but
I mean, I will say there has been one Star Wars episode recorded already, but I didn't even think about the prequels, to be honest.
If the one thing that the prequels got right is the thing that Thor adopted, which is the space stuff, the ships being asymmetrical and having like weird flight patterns, and like you can see the Asgardian boat skiff things are basically the Jabba's barge, but like dressed up to be a little more Nordic. And then the Dark Elves technology is super similar to the kind of asymmetrical Trade Federation ships from the prequels, and that's at the core of what Jack Kirby did with his artwork back then, was just combine psychedelic imagery with space imagery, with sci-fi imagery, and he was just kind of like pouring all this into the same place. And that's kind of the core of the Thor series too, is like, yeah, we have spears that shoot lasers, because to your dumbass Midgard brain, you don't understand that magic and science are really the same thing when you get to where we are.
Yeah.
And that...
Yeah, which I've always liked that distinction of the Thor movies with the whole magic science.
That works for me.
And I mean, that's... that you're funneling into one of the points that I have, which is basically this movie feels comic book as fuck.
Yes.
This
very
feels
much so.
more so than any Phase MCU movie that had been released at that point. I will argue this felt more like a comic book.
Yeah.
You got characters jumping all over the place. Like, yeah, we're explaining things, but sometimes we're not, and it's cool. Like, we're just going with it. You're changing aesthetics every couple of minutes. Like, it works. It's just going, and it's mostly focused around the characters and their interactions, and we don't care as much if the action makes as much sense,
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the only other movie in the franchise up to this point is the first Avengers.
Yeah.
That feels that way.
Yeah.
Oh,
which this was only the second movie into Phase 2.
Yep.
So.
yeah. And there's a lot of makeup work that has to come along with that too. I think in general, coming off of the Avengers, the expectations were too high. I think, like, retrospectively, I look back and I think of like what people wanted out of the next set of movies. Now that they proved you can do the impossible, we can get the Avengers together and it can work. How do you continue to make it feel like we've blossomed into this new world? And I think overall, all of Phase 2 is excellent, and then got this weird like stepbrother like branding because it was awkward coming off of the Avengers. But like when I look at Phase 2, Iron Man 3, that's a banger. Thor Dark World, that's a banger. Winter Soldier, that's a banger. Guardians of the Galaxy, that's a banger. Age of Ultron, yeah, I get why that didn't feel like a banger.
I'll give you that one.
I
It's not
love
one of my
Age
favorites.
of Ultron.
But then they followed it up with Ant-Man, and Ant-Man was a fucking banger, and it never
I
should
love
have
that
been.
movie.
Man, is Phase 2 the best
I
phase?
think it is. Personally,
I mean, Winter Soldier is my favorite MCU movie still to this day.
yeah, personally, I think Phase 2 got to exist in that experimental realm of, okay, if we can't top the Avengers, let's just get weirder. And they got weirder, and I got my money's worth. I saw all of these movies opening night in theaters.
Yeah. I think that Marvel is kind of fighting against two things, and that's like the first being just completely fucking slipped my brain. That's useful.
Marvel's fighting against two things.
Yeah.
I think the first one is definitely going to be fan expectations. I feel like they're constantly...
Well, yeah, that's a huge one.
Honestly, though, I think they might be past that at this point. Like, I think we have truly reached the era where if Marvel is on it, it will make money.
Yeah.
But not necessarily as much money as Marvel wants to make out of it.
Right.
No, and, you know, as we're talking about this, Black Widow's probably the lowest performing Marvel movie, but it's a pandemic,
Yeah.
I think most people.
Yeah.
Because, currently that's sitting at $367 million. And I personally, I love Black Widow, but like I said, I love every Marvel movie. But I like the spy ones a little more than others. Like, it's why Winter Soldier is still my favorite, and, like, Civil War is close behind it.
I think one of the things, in addition to fan expectation, that is going to hold them back is when they were initially making Phase 1 of the MCU, they kind of had to prove that a comic book could feel like a movie, because we hadn't had that many concrete examples of that on any significant financial scale.
Yeah.
And I think they went a little too far trying to prove that, and now they need to walk it back. Like, I'm liking the direction that they're going with a lot of the series, where they're making things less focused on realism, and they're making the aesthetic parts of filmmaking, like transitions and things like that, an actual part of the, like, you know, fourth wall breaking and that kind of stuff. They're making the filmmaking process part of the film.
Yeah.
And I like that, and I'm hoping that kind of stuff is stuff that they continue with, because it helps make it feel more like a comic book, which comic books regularly take advantage of the fact that they are a comic book, and, like, they're very meta.
Yeah.
Like especially I love the recent Squirrel Girl books, and Squirrel Girl is those books are really good at just exploiting the fact that they are a comic book and using that fact and the medium that they exist in to their advantage, and being willing to break the wall. And I think that now that audiences are like, okay, like we understand what comic books are about now, like maybe the mass audience didn't when the phase 1 and 2 of the MCU started, but audiences understand what comic books are now. They kind of get the vibe. They're not as coming in with movie expectations as strongly now.
Yeah.
Let's start hitting them with something that feels more like a Scott Pilgrim.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that's happening to the genre as a whole.
Yes.
Like, before the show, me and Seth were talking about the new Suicide Squad movie, and, like, you don't get many comic book movies that are like that.
Well, and that's
like,
a big reason I was such a big fan of the Guardians movies as they came out, and even in Endgame, some of my favorite bits are the Guardian bits. Just James Gunn established a style that is so apeable that even the Russos were like, "Oh yeah, if we throw in Rubber Band Man and their ship and have them dance, everyone will be happy."
Yep.
And it's like, well, fucking not wrong.
Well, to be fair, James Gunn also helped write all the
Guardian
absolutely
scenes. I mean, his name's all over Phase 3 of the MCU for sure.
But the way, like, Batman Begins turned everything into dark and brooding, Guardians has turned everything to pop culture soundtracks and, like, comedy.
I do have my biggest downside to Ragnarok, if you guys want to or not Ragnarok, Dark World, if you guys want to jump into it.
Sure.
Yeah, because I wonder if I know what it is.
I bet you can guess. So the villain, Malekith, is a little underbaked.
Yes. And you get a great actor playing this villain, and it's just like, it doesn't matter. Like, he's not, you don't let this dude shine through of this character.
Yeah. So for anyone who's not familiar with me, and Jeremy, thank you for the invite onto the show. I'm going to real quick plug so I can move into my point.
Plug all you.
I run a podcast called The Film Rescue Show, where we we take movies and pitch hypothetical versions of them. So a big part of what I do when I watch movies is kind of deconstruct and reconstruct the plot to make sure it holds, right? And the issue that I run into every time I watch this movie is Thor and Malekith interact twice. Once when his mother's murdered, which he's not in the room for, and then the second time at the end, which is to stop the bad thing from happening. And that's really lazy.
Yeah.
Yep.
He out of Phase 2 always has the issue of Phase 2 doesn't have as many good villains, which I would agree. Even in Guardians, the villain, what's
Ronan,
his name?
he's the worst part.
Ronan. Yeah, like he's like passable. He's fine to get you through that movie. I will say Iron Man 3, I like Aldrich Killian, but that's just because I'm a big Guy Pearce fan.
I love him, and I even love their retake of the Mandarin. I think that was a good way to kind of shoe step around how racist the comic books got for a minute there.
Yeah, which, hey, Iron Man 3 will 1,000% be an episode on here. But even Ant-Man as well has like a pretty lame, like, oh, it's just another guy who does the same thing
Villains
you do.
were the problem of Phase 2. Even like, I think Ultron is probably my favorite MCU villain, and even he didn't get everything he could have got.
No, like that one is one that is boosted by how good the actor was. Yeah. And, Winter Soldier, probably the best example of a villain in this movie. Because, I mean, for one, it was Hydra as a whole, plus the Winter Soldier, plus Alexander Pierce, played by a great actor. Like, that one is probably the standout. But yeah, like, this is maybe the worst and most egregious of the whole MCU of worst villain.
Well, I'm really curious. I know, Aerin, you're pretty familiar with the Thor comics. How how far off is this from comic Malekith, and what
I
could
don't
they have
remember
done?
Malekith in the books, to be honest.
Yeah.
I genuinely don't know that I've read any of the books that Malekith was in.
I know.
I've never read a Thor comic, honestly.
I know his, like, if you go to the Malekith Wikipedia page, the picture they have of him makes him a little more Gollum than Power Ranger villain. And let me be clear, I kind of like the Power Rangers-ness of the villains in this. It felt good to my inner child to be like...
I like the look of Malekith.
Yeah, I don't...
Like, just like from a costume and makeup perspective.
Yeah, I don't have any issues with that. It's fully like... And his performance is passable. Like, he's definitely pouring himself into it. I guess I'm just curious as to, like...
Yeah, so I was Googling really quick just to see if he was even a major villain. Like, he was in a couple of issues in 84, and in a couple of issues in 86, a couple of issues in 95, and then, like, some issues in 2000, 2001. Like, he really, it does not, based on just a very, very quick minimal publication history that I'm quickly Googling. I've never gotten the impression he was a major villain.
No,
I don't think he is.
And
so it was a weird choice to me.
Yeah, I think that's, and especially for Phase 2 for the MCU, they were really tied to the comics in ways that they knew they couldn't stray too far away without getting, kind of the smiting of the fan base. So they were, I think they were promised to the comics a little more, and so they had to, like, go back through, who are popular Thor villains we could redo. But even the comics,
well, I mean,
kind of...
I think the part of the problem is like, who does he normally end up in problems with? Loki, Hela, Enchantress, Thanos, Galactus.
Right.
Like, it's either Loki's dad, Laufey, Kang the Conqueror, obviously. It's either people that are way too big, B, things that are like Midgard Serpent, which kind of difficult to do well depending on CGI budget and stuff like that.
Right.
Or people that are too small scale, like, wouldn't really be fucking around with, like, Earth and the 9 realms that much because they're Asgardian,
Right.
And I do think that is one of the things that is a struggle with that character, especially, once now that Loki is gone as a villain in, like, the Prime Loki, there's a limit to the number of normal major Thor villains that you can canonically, like, bring in. Like, I just...
And at this point in the MCU, I think Loki's time as a villain is probably over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, maybe, like, President Loki, I'd like to see his villain, but I like this Loki as a hero thing. I love that direction, and I, even to a degree, like Sylvie Enchantress, they've basically confirmed that link that Sylvie is the... they're just kind of... Sylvie Lushton or however you pronounce her name, she's not the greatest. Like, she's inherently a female character that is from a certain age in comics. Like, you do need to clean her up a certain bit, and I think, Sylvie, Laufey daughter, makes sense. So they've basically confirmed that is Enchantress. So, now they're bringing her in, and it would be interesting to see her as a, like, yes, you've got this Prime Sylvie that's in love with Loki. Sorry, spoilers, Loki. But also, there are other Sylvies that are antagonists, and I think that is far more gripping now with Loki's character at this point than other Lokis that are bad. It's no, the woman that you love is bad. And I'm going to keep putting asterisk after woman, because character technically gender fluid, but,
right.
Yeah, like, I almost wonder if Loki... I mean, I know we're supposed to be talking about Dark World, but Loki's part of Dark World. But I wonder if his kind of future is being the Paul Revere to the danger of Kang.
Yeah. that's
like,
another.
hey, he's the guy carrying the torch that's going to let everybody know, like, hey, while you're off doing whatever you're doing, this stuff is coming.
It feels like they accidentally found themselves into a boy that cried wolf situation where Loki's lied so many times across the MCU that his
he won't be taken care of.
Yeah,
Seriously.
yeah, his fate is just not to be taken seriously.
That's going to be
go
really,
rewatch
really
Loki.
sad. I'm going to circle back to Thor: Dark World in just a second, but a very quick thing about Thor: Dark World before we get into the other point I have about Thor: Dark World is that this is kind of a better representation of Loki's character than Thor's. Like, Loki is better than Thor in this film.
Ooh.
I can get behind that.
Thor doesn't have an arc, really.
Yeah.
It's basically just that he's sad.
Yeah, I mean,
because he
in
can't
the first
be with
one
Jane.
he does. In Ragnarok he does, but yeah, in this he's kind of at the same place by the end of the movie.
Yeah, like the big glow up for him is that he's recognized he doesn't want to be king, which I think the movie does a serviceable job enforcing that idea. But as far as arcs go, I don't know if a realization counts as a full character arc.
Yeah, because it's even just kind of passed off in the beginning of like his dad, like, yo, it's time for you to be king. Like, let's stop messing around. And at the end, it's just like, no, I don't want to.
You know what I'm realizing? The Thor series being so Shakespearean makes it track along with the Lion King series in an oddly good way.
So well.
Because I don't know if anybody knows this, Lion King 2 fucking slaps.
It's so good.
I've never seen Lion King 2.
There's so much I must be, can't only
I assume it's on Disney.
I'm sure it's got to be.
The way I am. Sorry.
No, you're like,
I love that song. Is a total fucking bop.
So the difference is they didn't have the animation budget, so the animation's more TV-esque than it is film-esque.
Yeah.
But
that's fine.
the songs,
a lot of the Disney animated sequels are like that, and some of those are really good.
there are songs I remember from Lion King 2 before I remember Lion King songs. That's how good the soundtrack is. And then you get Lion King 1.5, which I guess I would throw Thor Ragnarok kind of into that. Like, it's meta and it's retrospective, and they're looking back at, things in a funny lens. And the Thor movies kind of track along with that, and that's crazy to me.
That makes sense. Lion King 2 is on Disney+.
Oh, perfect. Well, I would highly recommend.
Highly recommend it.
I've always been curious about all those animated sequels. The only ones I've ever seen are Aladdin. So.
The Aladdin ones were great. I think, was it Prince of Thieves?
Oh, Return of Jafar is awesome.
Yeah. The Aladdin...
Mulan 2 has some moments.
What was that?
Mulan 2 has some moments.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
It's about weird arranged marriages, though, so you have to kind of set that aside.
Interesting.
I've actually never seen the first
You've
one.
never seen the first Mulan?
No, that one has always... it's just been one of those things that never... I've seen, like, bits and pieces of it, like, in school. I think it was thrown on one day when we had nothing to do. But it's like, hey, we only got to see, like, 20 minutes of it. So I think that's all I've ever seen.
Aerin, you're the Mulan expert here. It's your recommendation.
There
are a
Mulan.
lot of Disney
Mulan
animated
is brilliant.
movies
The
I have
first
not
one
seen.
is great. It's wonderful. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, I'll say there's a lot of the Disney animated ones I've never seen. Like, I've never seen Hercules.
Yeah.
Mulan. Like, I saw Hunchback of Notre Dame for the first time, like, 2 years ago.
Oh, so you saw the Disney Renaissance, but you skipped the second Renaissance.
Yeah.
Ah, interesting.
I think I just, like, the other movies I owned, the other ones I did not, so it's just kind of by nature those are the ones I watched.
Yeah. No, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I remember the VHS days.
Oh, yeah. I wore out Aladdin on VHS.
Same.
That is, like, my all-time favorite Disney
Aladdin
movie.
and Beauty and the Beast, we literally destroyed the VHS playing it too many times.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I bet. My second point about this, though, is that Thor isn't really a good hero in this. And he's not really, like... The point at which I felt most sympathetic for Thor was when he was alone in the merriment, and I kind of had that, oh man, we've all been alone and like the alone in a crowded room, that feeling like that.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be him. I didn't want to fuck him. I didn't want to, like, have him protect
Speak
me.
for yourself.
Like, all of the other characters that were around were more interesting and more compelling. So, like the first part of my thing was that this was more of a Loki narrative arc than a Thor narrative arc. This is more of a characters around Thor than a Thor story.
Yeah.
Like, the scenes in Midgard, without him there, I would watch an entire movie that was just those characters. I would watch, like, an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. equivalent thing that's just them, like Jane Foster and Darcy and Ian and Eric, and they just operate this organization in London that, like, communicates regularly with the other 9 realms. And you occasionally have characters from other realms show up and, you know, have some cameos and stuff like that. I think that show...
Are we all in agreement that Darcy's actually really great and not annoying the way that some other people feel?
She's brilliant. She's so good in this.
I really like... I was super excited when they announced her for WandaVision just because, I like Kat Dennings. Like, I think she is fun and funny, and I think she is really, like, there's just one little moment where, like, when Thor comes back for the first time, she's like, hey, what's up, man, how's space? Like, I just love her in this movie.
I just hate that she was in that racist farce of a TV show, Two Broke Girls, for fucking ever.
Yeah, you take the money you can get, right?
Yeah, I avoided that.
I don't know.
Really
She's got enough talent and looks that I think she could have gotten money doing something else. But
I'm not a fan of sitcoms in general, so I kind of whole ass avoided that one. I do agree with what y'all are saying though, because Thor's reply to that remark, space is good. Like they have exactly the same like energy towards each other of like, you're kind of fucking weird. You're weird too. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like I love her little banter with was it Ian the intern?
Yeah.
And like when they're throwing the stuff in the time portal or whatever it is, and he throws the keys, and like they're all just really great moments with them.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many excellent moments in this movie that I think they make up for the lack of a set piece. I think you barely go a couple minutes without either a good line or a good scene or a good joke or a good...
Yeah.
This is honestly one of the funniest Marvel movies.
It's so funny. Like, anytime...
Like, I was noticing that this time. There's a lot of jokes in this.
Yeah. Anytime Tom Hiddleston... Like, the only time Chris Hemsworth is actually a good actor... I don't want to say that. The only time that Chris Hemsworth's Thor feels well fleshed out in this is when he is playing off Tom Hiddleston.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, a lot of their brother banter is just made up on the fly.
Yeah. Well, there's even in Thor Ragnarok, there's the scene where he talks about him changing into a snake and stabbing him. Apparently that was all ad-libbed and stuff.
Get Help is 100% ad-libbed. They're just like, basically, we don't have any dialogue, but you need to start at the elevator and then throw Loki at this person, and then you just figure it out. That whole scene, and it's one of the most memorable interactions, and it just really makes me think that what I started to say was Chris Hemsworth wasn't good, but I feel like the parts that were written for Chris Hemsworth were not good, and I think that everything good that came out of his performance was probably largely improvised or in spite of, or the other characters being the good part of the interaction.
His best acting in the movie is when Loki is dying. Like, his mother was just murdered in front of him, and he failed at taking down the villain. And they failed us.
I will always say Chris Hemsworth's best everything is when he's with, like you said, like when he's with Loki. One of my favorite Thor Loki moments is Thor Ragnarok when they're riding the elevator, and he's like, "Oh, well, soon you'll be rid of me," and he's just like, "Loki, I thought the world of you, like you were my brother, you were everything to me," and it's kind of Loki realizing, "Oh, maybe I'm the dick," like after all these years. But, like, they do that stuff so well, and then immediately turns into, hey, let's do Get Help.
Yeah.
And yeah, like the stuff in this one, like when he goes to see him in the prison cell saying he needs his help, and that whole escape sequence, and yeah, his death scene, like those two just play off each other so well.
Yeah.
And I believe every emotion that either one of them is putting on that screen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I feel like Loki's reaction to Frigga's death, to go back to it, is more... It felt like something, and I want to point back to Loki for a second. That kind of thing that he does where he screams and puts out like a burst of magical energy around him. That's the scene on Lamentus when Sylvie gets frustrated because he's broken the temp pad. She does the same thing. She screams and she does a magical burst, and he's like, "Does that make you feel better?" Because like, and I thought that was funny because it shows how far his character came.
I would love to just sit and do a marathon of just the 3 Thor movies and Loki. Like, maybe that's how I start watching the MCU from now on. Because, I've done the marathon like 2 or 3 times at this point. Just like, just do franchise marathons.
Have you done the...
Because I think...
Have you done the timeline-specific marathon?
I have not. That is the one I have not done.
I did that one recently. It's great because it adds, like, letter grades to a couple of the movies. Specifically Captain Marvel, watching that in phase 1 right after First Avenger, I was not aware of how well they paralleled Captain Marvel with Captain America. And when you watch those 2 movies back to back and recognize that it's like, this is the approachable Earthbound World War II version, and then this is the goofy Guardians space version of the same story. Oh fuck, these work together really well.
Yeah.
Interesting. I've only seen all of Captain Marvel once. Every other time I've tried to watch it since, I always kind of like end up ducking out halfway through.
One thing about the MCU, I think, is that I see a lot of people just like make blanket complaints about things like, for example, in Loki, and the MCU is very heavily parallel based. Like, one of the things that they consistently do is take something and subvert the expectations by like matching the parallels until a certain point. Like, What If is doing that exactly to the letter right now. And that's a really common thing that they do in order to get information across to the audience faster, and also to make in-jokes and things like that. And if you don't necessarily recognize or remember those parallels, you lose so much. Like, yes, can this movie stand alone? Probably, especially if you're somebody who likes movies that have a more convoluted plot and that have a wide variety of settings and aesthetics. But if you... you definitely get more out of it if you've seen more Marvel stuff. Like, coming fresh off of seeing Loki, especially seeing all of the things that Loki took from that to build from, just remembering other things from other MCU franchises that Thor Dark World pulled from. Everything is connected in this big, huge web, and that's part of what makes it so intriguing. And if you don't see those things, you don't get the whole value of the piece as a whole.
Aerin, you just teed me up for my segue just so well. Oh, fuck. This is going to be glorious. I'm so happy. So... Oh, fuck.
Did you just forget?
I did. I knew exactly what I was going to say.
Parallels. We were talking about parallels, and if you don't know where you came from in the MCU, you may not appreciate where you're going.
Oh, that was perfect.
Oh, man. I
That was a me-level moment.
I blue-balled myself.
Such a build-up to, I forgot.
I had it on the tip of my tongue, and I just played it up too hard. Okay, so... Oh, fuck, with parallels. What was I thinking? Oh, God, I'm so sorry, Jeremy, if you go back to cut all this out.
No, this is the funniest part of any podcast.
Anyways, great point, Aerin. That was wonderful and well thought out.
Thank you.
I'm dying. I don't even know what to say now. That was amazing. I could not believe that just happened. Yeah, for me, this is the Loki movie.
Yeah.
As
really
much
is.
as like he's not in it as much as I would like him to be. But
AKA
like you
all
said,
of the minutes.
Yes, exactly. Which I was so glad he got his own show for that reason.
Yes.
But I do watch this movie for the relationships. Like you said, there's not a lot of action set pieces that are super memorable. Although I will say, whenever I think of this movie, the one thing I think of is at the end when the hammer is flying all over the place.
Yeah.
Like, that is so fun. And, like, when it flies by Darcy and she just calls it Mew Mew.
The visual comedy of the hammer is, like, when he hangs it on the coat rack. I don't know if y'all remember that joke at the end of Ultron where Steve and Tony are, like, arguing about, like, could an elevator lift Mjolnir? Just to have that already expressed on film of, like, nope, it's not exactly what you think it is. I love that bit. It's such a great, like, physical comedy bit. Which
apparently was something he just did.
I absolutely positively want to see a scene in Loki that involves him picking up Mjolnir. Like, I think that Hiddleston would be able to convey the full weight of what that means to Loki. Because Loki, more than anyone else, I think will understand how the hammer works, and knowing that it found him, that it thought that it let him pick him up. Like, it would be huge for him, and I think Tom Hiddleston would make the most out of it.
If Loki was worthy, that would probably make me cry more than when anybody cried at Captain America picking it up.
Yeah, I would totally have a full...
Because Captain America was assumed... that like he's gonna be able to, but Loki's earned. If Loki does it, that's built upon.
Yeah. And I honestly, it's interesting because obviously there's the throne room scene in Dark World at the end where Thor tries to give the hammer back to Odin, and Odin, which Loki in disguise, says it's yours now. And, the nod is basically that Loki realizes that he can't carry the hammer anymore, or that he can't carry the hammer. But also, I wonder if Odin, by that point in his development, could have actually picked... I think it would have been fascinating to see Odin, and maybe they could do this, like, on Loki or on something like that, just have Anthony Hopkins come in for a day, just to have, like, a flashback scene or something like that set from around that time period where, Odin's snooping around Thor's chambers because he's suspicious about something about Jane Foster, and he sees Mjolnir, and he goes to, like, pick it up, and he just can't move it. I think that would be... I would love that.
Yeah.
Because I don't think he's worthy. I genuinely don't think he has been for a while.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that.
I do wonder if it's one of those things that because he is the Allfather, maybe he doesn't have to be. He can just do stuff.
No.
Can God make a rock so heavy that he can't lift it?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not as super well versed in Thor. Maybe there is more to it in the comics and stuff. But I always just kind of assume since Odin was the one who gave it to him, maybe he has some power over it.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would... It feels like I love the way that they have not explained magic to any kind of specific degree within the MCU, because my brain would go to, well, if it's based around the character of a person and that's a quantifiable thing in the MCU, then I could imagine a world where Odin does create a weapon that he couldn't lift, that only specifically Thor or someone as worthy as Thor.
He's naturally worthy to wield, apparently.
Yeah.
Because he
what about
is the one who enchanted it.
I was rewatching the end of Endgame the other day, and there's the scene where Steve and Thor, when they're fighting with the hammers in the final battle, and they switch hammers. He's like, no, you get the little one. Does Stormbringer have the same thing? Like, can only Thor lift Stormbringer?
No, so Stormbringer is only wieldable by demigod types because their bodies are able to withstand the power that courses through it. Thor's hammer is specifically encoded with the enchantment that someone as worthy as Thor or Thor himself, when he's worthy, can lift it. So they are two separate rule bases there. Like, the Hulk could probably wield Stormbringer.
Interesting.
Assumably. Also, I remember what the fuck my point was 3 minutes ago.
Hey, what is it?
Okay. Aerin, you were bringing up the idea of parallels and how you have to watch this series with context from future movies and previous movies and things in tandem, right?
Yeah.
The reason I think this movie is officially like MCU underrated is because Avengers Endgame came out to say this is an important movie to our plot. And when you watch the events of Dark World along with what you know is happening during Endgame, there's a plot hole or two here or there, sure. Yeah, how'd they get the rock back or the ether back into what's-her-face, Jane? Yeah, sure. There's plot holes all over the place, and I'm not going to get tripped up in them, but I think the...
Give us the Disney Plus series of Steve Rogers having to put back all the
exactly.
stones.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Apparently,
I want to see him interact with Red Skull, and how did he get that back into Jane?
Yeah. So apparently there is an Avengers, like a prehistoric Avengers, where Odin is on Earth and he is not yet worthy. So apparently there are scenarios where Odin has been made unworthy of his own hammer in the past. So that is something
I'm familiar with that comic. I just assumed he had the hammer.
No, he has to earn it throughout the course of this hammer. This actually sounds interesting.
Is there a prehistoric Venom in that story, or am I thinking of something else?
I know it's Black Panther, it's Odin, it's like a Hulk type of character. Maybe like Hercules or something? I don't recall if there's a symbiote. What is it called? It's like Avengers 1 million or something like, or 1 million BC.
It's like 1 million BC.
Yeah, great idea, by the way. As someone that's unironically a fan of 10,000 BC,
Agamotto,
the movie.
Black Panther, Ghost Rider,
Ghost Rider, that because it's a mammoth,
and Starbrand.
Yeah,
I forgot about that.
Yeah, I think it might have just been like a single issue thing. I'm not even sure if it was like a full on volume of its own.
That sounds right. A little one-off. So I have a question for you both.
Sure.
Okay.
Let's say you are at a party of some kind and get locked into a MCU-related conversation, and Thor Dark World gets thrown up as, hey, this is the worst MCU movie. What is the scene or line or character, or what is one aspect of the movie that you bring up to this hypothetical person and say, you should revisit Dark World and concentrate on this thing? What is that thing to the two of you?
I have actually had this conversation. I always just kind of default. I think there are better answers, but I always default to the hammer scene at the end. And just like, come on, this movie's just fun. Like, just look at that whole end sequence and like watching the thing shoot up into space because he went to some other planet and then have to shoot back down because he teleported back. Like, that whole sequence just like cracks me up and is so much fun.
All I can think of during that finale is the Portal 2 line, let's have fun with portals. That's the whole finale.
Yes. It definitely has
like,
some mad Portal vibes.
I would maybe, as a counterpoint, offer the scene where Loki's brought into the throne room. Just because, like, it is a personal favorite of mine.
I mean, just Loki in general. I think in this, it is my big point that I make to... And because I, too, have had this conversation. I've always liked the movie because I thought Tom Hiddleston was fantastic in it. I thought it was one of his, like, earlier, like big market films that really showed his full acting range in a huge way, and I've loved seeing that character, but also I think seeing Sif and Darcy and like kind of more of their I don't know if it was Sif's origin. Was she in the original Thor?
Yeah, she's in it. Okay. She's not in Ragnarok, but apparently she's going to be in Love and Thunder.
She had schedule conflicts with her other thing, but I think she's freeing up more from what I've heard.
Yeah, she is on the cast list for Love and Thunder, so she will be back.
And I think she's going to be in an episode of What If, too. At least one.
Yeah, she is.
I've always loved her, and I think that she's particularly great in this. And I think that those, like, if you focus on every character that's not Thor, if you just imagine that this is called Asgard: A Dark World instead of Thor: A Dark World, I think it feels a little bit more apropos.
Yeah, like we were saying before, one of the things I love about this movie is how like the Asgard stuff. Like it is one of maybe the first MCU movies where I feel like we are spending a significant amount of time on a different world.
Yeah.
Because most of them up to this point have just taken place on Earth. Like
Yeah.
there is Asgard stuff in the first Thor, but not very much.
And they spend so much time setting up things early in the movie. Like the beginning part of the movie is a little bit clunky, but it's because you're setting up things like you're setting up the date so you can set up not only Darcy's characterization and stuff like that, but also the phone call that kind of makes them realize that the worlds are linked and kind of gives us this scene where Thor is dealing with a little bit of jealousy. Like you've got everything exists in it for a reason. And it's a really good example of that kind of like foreshadowing and setting up foreshadowing, both in terms of a franchise foreshadowing and movie foreshadowing. All of those things make it worthwhile.
Yeah, all in service of a very forgettable villain.
Yes. Sometimes the villain and the conflict don't matter. Sometimes it's just the heroes and the characters.
That would be my argument against Malekith taking down the whole movie. It's really not. He doesn't
matter.
Yeah, it's
No, I don't think so. Like we even said before, he's passable, like as something to push the plot forward, but like I wouldn't say anything about him is like egregiously bad.
No, yeah, I think it's just like I said, it's a little underbaked. All the flavors are there. I think I would have loved to see him kind of mess around with those no face masks and have him like hide within his grouping of people and like show that he's more of a tactical leader over the last 5,000 years that he's been waiting. But like those are just kind of like dream scenarios of like if this were a perfect movie with a perfect villain, you could demonstrate that with Malekith, I think. But if the point is to highlight the family drama, which I would argue that's what this movie exists to do.
Yeah.
It kind of crushes on that.
And I would argue that Malekith exists less about being the villain of this film and more to set up Odin as a villain. Because there's a point where, like, I think it's Thor asks Odin how you're any different if you think that way. And he's like, well, I'm going to win. Yeah. He's not different at that point. It sets up that Odin is a villain who needs to be deposed as much as Malekith does, which helps set us up for a Loki redemption arc.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say that I think is it Curse that becomes the big like monster villain guy? Like I think he's honestly the more interesting villain. Like he's just being this imposing beast is a much cooler character.
He's what I was thinking of when I mentioned the Power Rangers villains. He's very much like a big stuff suit Power Ranger villain, but I think it works really well. I mean, he's
used very well for like what he is, and he has a great death.
When he's beating the shit out of Thor, I believe it. Like he looks like the kind of being that could get those hits in. And you're right. Is that his death though? Because that was what Loki showed us. But
I believe so. Yeah, because he pulls off the grenade on his weight on his belt. Loki kills him.
I mean, he does. We don't know how much of that scene is an illusion,
right?
Because we know that Loki could not have died during it.
Yeah, I get the assumption that most of the action is actually happening outside of what Loki does to Thor, and that maybe he just like kind of. I honestly think he did get stabbed, is the thing, but he just survived.
Interesting.
And he used like he knew he was going to survive, and he just used that as an opportunity to fake his death. That's always how I read the situation.
I can see it. I don't think that's not possible. I think my read has always been from the point where Loki stabs Curse to save Thor. From there on, that's all an illusion.
That he killed him when he stabbed him, and then everything else was just an illusion.
Yeah. That's been my take.
Maybe. I always felt like Curse being as powerful as he is, that the grenade would have to be the thing that actually kills him. And, if Loki's already stabbed at that point, I can't remember. I always feel like that was just, oh, I'm definitely going to survive this, but I'm going to make you feel like I don't.
I don't know. What do you think, Aerin?
I mean, compared to Toad in the first X-Men movie, he's a capable villain. And I think that we should all be happy that that's not where we ended up.
I can't argue with that.
You know what? Comic book points that cannot be argued with.
To this day, I'm so sad they dropped the through line of Storm trying to tell that joke, and then they only left in the punchline at the end. There was supposed to be build up to that. Like, it wasn't supposed to be so...
Was there really?
She was supposed to be trying to tell this what happens to a blank when it gets hit by lightning, and she's not able to execute the joke. She was supposed to have a lot more screen time in the original script, and then they just cut all that out and left the punchline in at the end, and it's like, we didn't earn this anymore.
I love that everybody points to X-Men as like a high point of Halle Berry's career when they always did her dirty.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's why she refused to do Storm. They kept trying to get her back, and she's like, okay, am I going to do something in this movie this time, or...
Nope.
And they're like, nope, and she's like, all right, well, it doesn't matter how much money you flash. I can get roles making the actual movie as the producer and make as much money as I want,
Yeah.
And I love that energy for her, and I hope she sticks with it.
Me too.
I just wish we would have actually... Like, here's the thing. Storm is not this character who doesn't have books where she has narratives.
Right.
Like, true, there are not as many as other characters, but they've shown that they're willing to just completely rewrite and make things up and, give fucking Jubilee's entire goddamn storyline to fucking Wolverine. So who the fuck... What difference does it make? It's all fake anyway.
Yeah.
Jeremy, this is what happens when you bring on two people that are
Both of us.
very deeply entrenched in the comic book world. We just go on these tangents.
Oh, that's great, though. That's great. It's why people are listening. They want to hear all this stuff. Because honestly, this is, even with like Thor and stuff, and X-Men, since we were just talking about it, those are some of my biggest comic blind spots. I've never really read Thor. I've only read some X-Men.
I mostly read Sif's books, and Loki kind of has been in the comic books, has had A, books of his own as the villain, and B, books of his own where he's the hero, and like, he's been part of other characters. Long story short, I really haven't read a lot of Thor. I've only read the Thor that I have needed to get the Loki that I wanted, is basically where I'm at.
Yeah.
I've never, outside of my inherent fascination in all things mythological, he's not that interesting of a character at this point. There were some things... There have been some interesting points with, like, the Donald Blake versus him. There have been some interesting points with, like, Jane Foster taking over Mjolnir's mantle and being Lady Thor. Like, I think those are some of the more interesting runs, and maybe I just haven't read good stuff with Thor. I'll allow that, but a lot of it is not that deep, especially if his character powers are not that dissimilar than a lot of other characters, or him as a mythological feature. So a lot of his stories are things I've already seen.
The way I've always read his comics has been, there is Goku Thor that's going to fight, the gods of the universe, and it's all about, powering up and being strong enough. And then there's Green Knight Thor, where he's a knight that just fucks up and has to fix his fuck-ups. Yep. And the Green Knight takes tend to be my favorite ones, because I would much rather see a knight wrestle against honor and respect and authority and things like that than I would watch a god power up enough to fight another god. Like,
a fallible character is always more compelling than an infallible one.
And exactly.
Yeah.
And one narrative tends to be very prone to infallible characters.
There's a reason I checked out of Dragon Ball Z after the Cell Saga, and just,
because that's where it should have ended.
Like, I get what's going to happen from here on out. I understand the storytelling, guys.
Like, don't get me wrong. I love all of that, but that is where that should have ended.
And like, I'm not putting down that storytelling style at all. Like, I get the Shonen Jump. It's all, just power ups from the last thing, and like I sat through Naruto during COVID, and oh boy, do they go to the Goku places by the end of that. I get its draw. I enjoy it. I just tend to prefer broken characters, like Aerin was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why Yu Yu Hakusho is my favorite anime. Just all broken characters. For the most part.
My favorite is probably Evangelion, but that really doesn't surprise anybody.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. But I think Chris Hemsworth also is at his best when he is this tragic Thor.
Yep.
Like, that's why Infinity War is my favorite Thor.
That's why Fat Thor is, like, best Thor.
Oh, yeah. It's great. Like, him still being worthy is, like, one of the best moments in that entire movie, like, bar none.
That's huge.
But, like, I love Infinity War Thor and, like, the adventure he goes on with Rocket.
Yeah.
And when he shows up at the final battle is maybe my favorite moment in that movie. Like, like, that stuff is what made me fall in love with him in those movies.
One of my favorite things in Endgame is post Thanos attacking the Avengers HQ before they go into the main battle. It's the Trinity, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor.
Oh yeah.
And Thor has his glow up moment, which relates to very specifically his beard and hair get better, but he doesn't get skinny, and I love that.
I was so thinking that, like, are they going to make him skinny when this happens? But no, he's still just fat.
I love that. I love
that.
Because he's like, he's overweight, probably for Chris Hemsworth body type, I would potentially assume. I don't know. But he's still a fucking tank. Like, he's not any less, like, husky, masculine, bulky. Like, he looks like a force to be reckoned with. He just has the who's Ray Stevenson's character in the Warriors 3?
Volstagg?
That sounds right. Volstagg. He's got the same, like, he and Volstagg, if they could have been in that scene together, it would have been perfect. It would have been like, oh, I understand why you drink so much. This belly is helpful. I love that.
Man, it's crazy how many people in this had, like, multiple comic book movies. Because, like, Ray Stevenson had this in Punisher, Zachary Levi had this in Shazam.
And it's a good change of pace considering the beginning of this movie has a fat shaming joke when, like, the two of the guards are joking around and one of the guys is basically like, well, if you were on top, you'd be flattened.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I don't even know if I caught
that's
that.
Zachary Levi's character. It's like ADR jokes in the background.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I doubt you would have caught it unless you had the thingies on, subtitles on.
Yeah, when I was watching the first half, I was cooking, so I might have missed that.
Yeah, it definitely was towards the very beginning. It was very
There's a few ADR jokes that are thrown in here. That might be my final point to bring up is this film was made before Marvel bought their Atlanta, Georgia property for filming. They have their huge campus in Atlanta now where basically everything gets filmed that's not specifically on location. And the phase 2, I think, was the phase where that campus was being built, so they couldn't film everything there yet. And I think this is the last bastion of, like, different looking MCU movies. There's a complaint that a lot of MCU looks the same now, which is 100% founded. Yep. Hey, if you shoot on the same lot, you're going to get similar looking movies. That's just how this fucking works.
Yeah. That was one thing I would say about Black Widow is to me it didn't feel that way, and it was the first one in a long time that felt that way. Yeah,
and I think the Eternals is probably going to turn out to be a similar way where because
I actually think more films are going to start looking. I would be. It would really surprise me if they didn't go the direction of DC and start filming some more stuff in Glasgow as well.
I hope so.
Yeah,
but yeah, this one not being part of that that sect of the next run of movies really shows here because of how different the filmmaking looks. Like the scene after they have their first battle at the beginning of the movie and they're all celebrating. that's all like it's shot kind of like Game of Thrones. It's like low light with lots of like background lighting for halo effects and dark faces, and
it's so good.
I missed that. I missed like locations instead of built sets, and that even the finale, like I've heard people say the finale looks grayscale, but it's like it's fucking London, dude. That's how everybody makes London look.
Well, that's how London looks.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'm checking because I was curious how much shooting Black Widow actually did in Georgia, since it is an international film, and they filmed in Norway, England, Morocco, and Budapest, and they built studios for the Red Room in England and in Hungary. So it seems like part of the reason is just that even for things that they did in a physical studio, they did outside of Atlanta.
Yeah.
And it definitely helps.
Yeah, like I only watched it the one time, and I just remember feeling like halfway through the movie I was like, man, this like doesn't have that kind of look that all the other ones did. And it really stood out to me.
Yeah.
It's a good-looking movie. It really... I have the advantage of having a 4K TV and watching these, like, shot for 4K movies. They're sharp-looking. It's hard to complain about cinematography. Even if, like, lighting isn't as moody as I'd want it to be, overall, they're really sharp movies, and I appreciate that about them.
Yeah. I think the scene that stood out to me in particular with that one was when Taskmaster first shows up and they're fighting on that bridge. Yeah. I was like, oh, you don't see a lot stuff like this, like in the dark like this in a Marvel movie.
That you can still see everything that's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm trying to think of like what movies even have scenes at night like that, and it's like Black Panther has that chase sequence, and Infinity War has that scene with Wanda and Vision.
The first Iron Man's all nighttime.
Yeah, but that was before they had all kind of started to get that same
true.
look.
That's very true.
Both Iron Mans, the first two, and at night. Actually, all three do.
You're not wrong. The third one has that most samey look, though, I think, of all of them.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
and you look at the scene where all the suits are showing up versus like the end of Iron Man 1, and there's definitely a glossy look to those newer movies.
Yeah, I think overall for me, Thor: Dark World, I give a solid B. Maybe a B- for the villain, but honestly, there's so much good in here that I'm generous enough to be like, yeah, a B sounds right. I don't think it's the best thing, Marvel. And I also think we're kind of spoiled that there's nothing in Marvel that's below a C. Like everything is passing and getting the grade. C's get degrees. That's the like college saying. And I think we're really spoiled for that. And
can attest.
Yeah, and I think that's why that's why these movies get kind of dogged on a little more than they deserve, is because even if it is a C, I think the C is the expectation of what the A could have been instead of recognizing the F that it might have been, and that.
You kind of touch on a theory that... Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But what you're saying is touching on a theory I have with the X-Men movies, is that I did not think Apocalypse was that bad. Like, I actually think Apocalypse is fine. It's got some issues, and they waste too much screen time cramming in Wolverine, which could have gone to the villain. But I think there is more good to bad with X-Men Apocalypse. But the second that movie came out, everyone was like, it's done. Get rid of it. Give it to Marvel. And I was like, yo, the last one was the best X-Men movie. Like, what are you talking about?
But also, I think there were a lot of people at that point in time who just wanted X-Men to be given back to Marvel so they could have...
It
so
seemed
Marvel
like a
could,
switch had flipped.
Because they were like, oh, we want Marvel to have Deadpool, so now Deadpool can be in everything, because if Deadpool's in everything, then everything will be rated R. It's like, no, that is not how any of this is going to work, you stupid idiot.
I love Deadpool, but Deadpool doesn't need to be anywhere near my Captain America movie.
Most Marvel stuff, Deadpool doesn't. And I've already seen people, and I mean, we did it on LSD, like we were talking about how about Deadpool possibly coming in and onto Loki. I honestly kind of hope that they don't. I think that they are great characters on their own, but just the fact that they have, dimension hop ability does not necessarily mean that they should be necessarily meeting up.
Yeah. This goes on to my point. I think Marvel should start having multiple crossover events, and that, like, hey, maybe you do a crossover that, like, has your street level characters over here, and they don't necessarily need to be fighting stuff out in space. And, you know, you could do something like that with Deadpool. Like, we don't need to see Deadpool with the Avengers, but I will gladly see Deadpool with, like, the Defenders.
Or Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. Please give me Deadpool Spider-Man.
No, I think you're totally right there. For X-Men Apocalypse specifically, I don't know if you recall what other perfect action movie came out alongside Apocalypse.
What year
2016, it was Mad Max Fury Road came out alongside Apocalypse.
That was 2015, I thought.
I'm pretty sure they both came out alongside each other.
I
know I saw them both in the theaters at the same time.
X-Men Apocalypse was 2016. In May.
No, I might have that backwards then. Because it was 2015 for Mad Max. Well, I could.
What was the 2016
I
release?
could Google it if I was smart. 2016 action movies.
Because it was summer, so it would have been near a Marvel movie, maybe.
Suicide Squad and Deadpool.
Was it Deadpool?
It might have been. I don't. What was the 2016 would have been Phase 2, right? Of
no, I think that was Phase 3, because I think Civil War was 2016. Which that was March, so it might have been Civil War, because it was a little
came out after
earlier,
Civil
but
War?
not too far. Batman v Superman?
Yeah, Civil War and Doctor Strange. Civil War was May. That might have been...
Okay, so then it would have been
it
that,
was fighting
because
Civil War.
Apocalypse was also May.
Okay, that makes more sense. I knew it was fighting something. I knew it was fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah.
That's neither here nor there. You can cut all this out if you want to, Jeremy.
But yeah, like, I don't know, that stuff always just kind of, like, expectation, I do think, plays a big part into how people feel about these. Because I would also say, this is like a B. And as I said at the beginning of the show, I don't think there's a bad Marvel movie. Like, if you sat here and polled what is your least favorite Marvel movie, for me, it's Captain Marvel. I still like Captain Marvel.
Yeah,
I mean, I would probably say Fantastic.
I was talking specifically MCU, but that is a terrible movie.
Specifically MCU.
See,
No, that's a good question.
Well, yeah, like, what is your least favorite? And, like, for me personally, I put Black Panther pretty far down the list, but I still think Black Panther's pretty great. And I know I'm in the minority with that one. Most people love that one a lot more than I do.
I'm going to make a really unpopular opinion here, and it's not so much the film itself as it's just it was so much CGI and so long. Guardians of the Galaxy 2. I desperately wanted to love that film. I've tried so much, but my brain just, it needs more things on frame that are not CGI. Ooh. And, like, everything.
That's in my top 5.
Everything in that film is CGI. I can't pay attention. I have to watch it in, like, 6 or 7 segments.
Yeah, that one's in my top 5.
I don't think it's a bad film. It's just not for me.
At first. Like, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, this one's fine, but the first one's better. So when that was on Netflix, that and Civil War, we would watch Netflix a lot at work. We used to have, like, a big TV that we could just throw stuff on. And Civil War and Guardians 2 were crowd pleasers. If nobody knew what to watch, like, just throw one of those on. It'll be on in the background. So I have seen those two movies, like, more than any other MCU movie. And every time I watch Guardians 2, I cry. Like, I love that movie so much.
Yeah. I wish, because, like, the whole scene between Star-Lord and his father, like, those are great. I just, it comes at the very, very, very end of a long...
That was my 1-2 combo punch to anyone. Do you remember back when Infinity War came out and the discourse was, how bad did Star-Lord fuck up? And how, like, people hated that for his character? And I was like... Bro, that's been his character since the beginning. Like,
yep.
Yeah, have you
do you
not
remember
been paying
the third
attention?
act of Guardians 2 starts because he just starts shooting his father?
Shooting his dad.
Like, yeah, this is on brand for Star-Lord, guys. sure, I get that it fucks up their plan, but that's part of the story.
Yeah.
I think my overall like feeling towards the MCU is I've always loved at least 70% of every single one of these movies. Yes, even Iron Man 2. Yes, even Incredible Hulk.
I don't think Iron Man 2 is bad. I love Hulk. Like, I honestly think I have maybe the weirdest list out of most people because I put a lot of those movies up a lot higher.
I like if you're doing the tier list, I would never give any of them worse than a C, and even many of the C's are like, man, if you change two things, you're a B- at least. So, I have a very hard time saying that I hate more than 20 or 30%, and like hate's strong.
You know what you need to do, Seth? You need to make a Marvel film tier list video for YouTube.
I should. That's a good idea.
Those tier list videos are really compelling. I keep watching them. I cannot stop.
I can't
really
stop list videos and stuff.
Yeah, those and those iceberg freaking videos. I just get hooked on
I've
them
started
and
falling
I
down
cannot
those.
stop watching. Yeah, I've been trying to think of, and this is Seth probably doesn't want to hear this. I've been trying to think of what iceberg video I'd like to convince Seth he needs to do because I feel like Seth needs to produce an iceberg video. I just haven't decided.
You know, it's funny you say that because
is it the Arthur iceberg? I was going to suggest that since you're already doing Arthur.
Literally, so I've been so. I loved Arthur growing up. It was my favorite cartoon as a kid because it was on PBS and it was available for me to watch. And I want to do a Arthur retrospective after we do our short films this year. And then the timing worked out perfect that Arthur's ending after 25 seasons. So I was going to do an Arthur retrospective, but I might just turn it into an Arthur iceberg video.
I mean, why not do both?
Yeah, I mean, well, if I do a retrospective, it's going to be like an hour and a half long. Like, it's going to be intensive.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying both, because a retrospective could be longer, and an iceberg could be like a 20-minute doodly-doo where you just go over like the...
True. Yeah, no, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the Arthur rabbit hole. I love it so much. And
if you're gonna watch 25 seasons worth of TV, you should really get more than one piece of content out of it. That just my advice as a
I agree.
Yeah, I would
and
say
the episodes are like 15 minutes long, so it's not a gigantic commitment. Not like The Simpsons or something.
Yeah. Oh, jeez. Yeah, that was one I missed. I was not an Arthur kid.
I feel sorry for you, man. That Arthur was some good years for me.
I was a little old, I think. What year did that start?
96, I think.
Yeah, I was 13 when it started.
Yeah, I was like,
I guess.
Yeah.
So
I was 5, so I was like maybe a little young when it started, but I grew into it by the time they hit their like stride. It was perfect for me.
I was like an exclusive Nickelodeon kid, so a lot of that Disney and PBS stuff I missed.
We couldn't afford cable till I was 14, so...
Yeah, my parents have never had cable, even to this day, so...
Wow.
I live the cord cutter life, and I'm never going back.
Do we have anything else on Dark World?
What was your letter grade, Aerin? Think you were the only one that didn't give one.
Oh, no, my letter grade is a B2. That's why it was.
Yeah.
You probably missed because I was just like, yep, me too.
Yeah. Ridiculous that this shows up at the bottom of most people's lists.
Yeah.
And I think those people just need to watch it again.
I would agree with that. Like I said, I think a lot of it comes down to, I get the feeling that people that are most interested in a Thor film are most interested in Thor. And when your hero is not being super heroic, he's kind of in his like I've done something and then it's made me question everything that I know about who I am, doing something, falling in love with Jane Foster, and now I'm very confused about it. And that being confused about it is really important to his character's development, and it's really important to the MCU's development as a whole, but for his character for this movie, it's not the best showing. And I get, like, if you're looking for, like, Thor at his greatest, no, this isn't it.
Yeah, I would honestly argue that Ragnarok handles him as a hero the best.
Well, and it's because
as silly
as
that movie is.
It's the bisexual trio, as I call them. The three of them, like, Valkyrie and Loki and frickin' Thor are just A+ together.
Do you guys think that maybe the biggest metaphor for why this movie got slept on was because it's basically Thor's senioritis episode, where like he doesn't got a shit ton to do, so it depends on all the side characters to carry it, and they do to their credit. But it's kind of like Thor's senioritis. He's like, I don't know what to do with the rest of my thousands of years of life.
I can totally buy into that. Everybody still there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I could actually totally see that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like I think this one deserves I hope post Endgame more people give this one a shot. Like Endgame kind of making this one a little more important. I wonder if that was on purpose.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there are movies in the MCU that have aged better post Endgame. I think this and like Age of Ultron are two of them. And I really like, I've never had a problem watching this one.
No, this is, I think, my third time watching it in the last 3 years, oddly, for different podcast reasons. I pitched a fix for it on one of my shows, and every time I come back to it, I get a little more nostalgic.
You like it more?
Say what? I get a little more nostalgic for it. I like the sequences better. The pacing feels more and more...
it's a quick movie.
Yeah, I don't feel like it drags at all. I like it, a little bit more every time I watch it. I'm like, damn, this is just a damn solid movie.
Yeah, it slows down when it needs to, and it never feels like it's a burden.
Yeah.
All right, so do we have any closing thoughts on Thor: The Dark World?
Give it another chance.
I agree.
All praise Loki.
All praise Loki.
My favorite tidbit scene in the whole thing, this is worth the whole watch to me, when Sif threatens Loki, the way that she releases him from that conversation is to move the sword to the other side of his shoulder in like a knighting move, which might have been accidental foreshadowing for his character. I don't know. Just thought it was kind of cool to watch.
It is curious to know like how much foresight did they have? Like, did they know they were going to do a Loki thing in the future? I always wonder how far ahead they really
I feel like the first 100,000 Tumblr post was enough for them to be like, oh yeah, we should do a Loki thing eventually.
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there has always been talk. It's interesting because I think it was Taika Waititi was asked about a Loki film, and he'd basically kind of like, nope, character's not interesting. I don't remember what exactly he had said. He had basically panned the idea.
Yeah.
So people
I
were
guarantee
kind of...
by the time they did Ragnarok, they knew, at least by that point.
Yeah. And that makes me wonder if at some point in time he was asked, like, hey, maybe for Thor 4, we do Loki instead. He's like, fuck it, no. But I do think that the character deserves everything that he gets, and so does Tom Hiddleston.
Yeah, he's a shining light in the MCU for sure.
The golden retriever human, and that is all.
Yeah. Well, all right, guys. This was a lot of fun. Did not expect to go this long, but I'm glad we did. So before we get out of here, you guys, you've been doing some stuff involving Loki. You might want to plug that.
Absolutely. I'll let Aerin roll out the red carpet for that one.
Oh.
Unless you want me to, I can.
Yeah, take a plug, please.
So, Aerin and I just came off of 9 weeks talking about Loki, the TV series on YouTube and our Patreon. It was mentioned before, we weren't talking about drugs. We called the series Loki Sucks Dick because he came out as gender fluid and bisexual in the series, and assumably he did a little bit of the sucky-sucky. We had a really great time breaking down not only the filmmaking and writing, which was stellar, but also the queer themes that ran through every single episode and kept building off of each other in a way that made Aerin look vaguely psychic. We just kept calling things from filmmaking, writing, and queer standpoints the whole way through. That was a great time. That's all on YouTube. You can check it out under Montressor Media. Pretty please subscribe to our channel when you get there if you enjoy the Loki series. We have much more coming out similar to that, and then some side trails that we're going to run down as well. I'm working on a Wrong Turn video essay, and then I'm going to work on the Arthur thing I was talking about, in case you weren't at all aware of how weird I am as a person that I can go from Arthur to Wrong Turn. You can check out all of that, plus all of our other podcasts on our Patreon, our YouTube, which is Montrester Media. That's also our Patreon. We're on Twitter. Lots of shit going on. I could plug everything. I think we mentioned Film Rescue and Palette Cleanser during this, so we covered those bases. Those are podcasts where we talk about movies. We have a few others where we talk about reboots, video games, general stuff. The Montrester thing is just rolling along, so here we are to promote it.
You guys have a website
We do,
now, right?
MonchesterMedia.com.
We do.
There you go.
And my new show, Montrester Does Marvel Analysis, should be starting up by the time this releases. I would assume it's going to be out.
I think I'm going to push this one quite ahead of most of the other episodes because I think this is really good and people want to hear it. So it might actually, it could release like next week.
Hell yeah.
So yeah, 23rd.
So maybe it's out, maybe it's not. Loki Sucks Stick and Loki After Dark are both going to be up.
All of those are out.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys. This was a lot of fun. I wanted to get a Marvel movie on, and Thor: The Dark World was a really fun one to start with, and there will definitely be more. But I think this is one of the biggest underrated films in the MCU, so I'm glad we got to talk about it.
Absolutely agreed.
All right, so thank you guys for being here, and thank everybody for listening.
Thank you for having us.
No problem.
Oh, okay.